Hey everyone, let's talk about mixing. We'll focus on listening and making decisions based on what we hear. This isn't a tutorial focused on technicalities. Instead, it's a few concepts and tips to help you finish your projects at home with whatever you have right now. First thing, trust your ears. Take listening really seriously. Try to find a quiet, comfortable environment and really focus on what you hear. Listen carefully, notice things you don't like, and make adjustments focused on those specific elements of the sound. Take it one step at a time. Mix until you don't hear any more problems, and then you're done. With this in mind, know when your ears are tired. Take frequent breaks and don't mix for 10 hours straight. Plan to mix in a few sessions spread over a few days. I like to mix first thing in the morning when my ears are fresh. Okay, this is probably the most important concept in the video. Calibrate your ears with reference tracks. Reference tracks are other recordings that you can listen to and compare with your mix. Choose 2 to 3 tracks that are roughly the same genre or type of music you're working on and sound the way you want this project to sound. You don't need to Google best reference tracks for mixing and use the same reference tracks as everyone else. Instead, choose recordings that you love and that feel related to the project you're working on right now. To set up reference tracks, ideally you should download the audio files and import them into your session. Keep them muted most of the time, but regularly check in with them to calibrate your ears. It's also important to loudness match your reference tracks. If the reference track is way louder than the mix you're working on, your mix is going to sound weak in comparison. Make sure to turn down the gain of your reference tracks to match the loudness of the mix you're working on and put your mix on an even playing field. You can do this by ear. Just turn down the gain until it sounds about the same loudness as your mix. For an example of how I use reference tracks, I'll often focus on reference tracks when adding reverb to chamber music recordings. It's always hard to tell if I'm being too subtle or too exaggerated with reverb. So I'll listen back and forth between my mix and the reference track, and one step at a time I'll match the reverb decay time, width, and volume. This will turn out totally different if I choose a really up-close, dry, intimate recording than if I choose a live recording from a huge concert hall. That's why it's important to choose reference tracks specific to your vision for the project you're working on. Alright, we'll talk about gear. You shouldn't stress too much about gear. Use what you have. That's not what this tutorial is about. I'll just give you a few thoughts. First, use headphones or monitors that you know really well and listen to a lot of music through them so you get a sense of how this particular pair of speakers shapes sound. Second, don't use Bose or Beats headphones or anything that's supposed to enhance the sound or anything with noise reduction, whatever, anything like that. Ideally, you want to mix with headphones or monitors that have a flat frequency response, meaning that the speakers filter and change the sound as little as possible. So Beats and Bose headphones aren't good for mixing because these brands enhance the low and high end of the sound. This can be really great for enjoying music, but let's say you make a perfect mix with Bose headphones. When anyone listens on another system, the bass will sound weak and the high end will sound muffled because those enhancements that you had when mixing aren't there anymore. Mix so that it sounds right even without those enhancements. Save your Bose headphones for your commute. Again, just use what you have. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. I'll pretty often use the Apple wired earbuds that came with my phone. Alright, last gear thought. Before finishing, listen to your mix with different speakers and headphones and take notes. Are the vocals too loud on your Bluetooth speaker? Is the kick inaudible on your phone? How does it sound in the car? You can keep these notes in mind when you return to your main mixing headphones. Don't drive yourself crazy with this. Remember, not every recording needs to be perfect in every situation. Think about how people will listen to your music. If you're mixing a delicate string quartet recording aimed at an audiophile type audience, it's okay if it doesn't sound great through a phone speaker. But if people will mostly be finding your music through social media, like it is for most of us, you might want to make sure it sounds okay on laptop speakers. Alright, let's get more concrete. Where should you start? Everyone has a different routine when you're getting started with a mix, and that's fine. Here are 2 possible routines. First of all, you could just fix what you already have. If you're producing, composing, whatever, and you generally like the sound you've been working with, just start there and make adjustments. Another option is to start from the ground up. Select all the tracks and turn all the faders all the way down. Then gradually bring them up one at a time. Start with the most important sounds and then mix around that. A lot of people start with the drums, but some people start with the vocals. I'd say just try something out and see what works for you. To set the level of each track, think about establishing a foreground and background. Bring important sounds forward by turning up the gain or by making them brighter with EQ. Push accompaniment sounds to the background by turning down the gain or increasing the reverb. Right? Reverb is going to make things sound further away. Some sounds are most effective if they're so soft that they're felt but not heard. Like maybe a shaker that is just barely audible, but it still adds this nice high-end sparkle. Also, don't forget about panning. Think of this as another parameter of your foreground and background. Imagine that you're creating a space and place each of your sounds in that space. Traditionally, you would keep the most important sounds front and center and push accompaniment sounds back or to the sides. Of course, you could also approach it more playfully and play with unusual placement in the stereo field. Panning can also solve the problem of two sounds masking each other. Let's say you have a guitar and a keyboard track that are kind of hard to distinguish from each other. By panning these to opposite sides, even slightly, they'll be much easier to tell apart. Next, we'll talk about the audio spectrum. Think of your mix in frequency bands, low, mid, and high frequencies. This is another place where your reference tracks will come in handy. Try to match each of these bands to your reference mix. So, for example, focus on the high end of your reference. Does your track sound dull in comparison? Does it sound brittle and harsh? Make adjustments accordingly. To make adjustments, you could do this just with track levels. For example, if the low end is muddy, turn down the kick drum and the other bass sounds. For a more advanced technique, you could also make adjustments with EQ. For example, if the vocals are loud but they're still hard to understand, you can use an EQ to cut high mid frequencies in the guitars, keyboards, and other sounds that might interfere with the voice. This will make space for the important frequencies of the voice that make it intelligible. Using EQ in this way is an advanced technique that takes a lot of practice, but it's something to think about if you feel like you're ready for it. Alright, last thing is loudness. Keep an eye on the level meters for individual tracks and the master track. You never want to see red because you'll be distorting the sound. You can later maximize loudness when mastering with a limiter. We'll talk about this in another video. Here's a tip. If you like the sound, but your master track is clipping, select all the individual tracks and turn them down together. This should preserve the levels relative to each other, but eliminate the clipping problem. To briefly summarize this video, trust your ears and make decisions based on what you hear. Mix in many sessions and take frequent breaks. Stop if your ears are tired. Always compare your mix to reference tracks. To get started, make adjustments to a work in progress or start from scratch and add sounds one at a time. Set the loudness and panning of each track to establish a foreground and background. Remember to use your reference tracks in making these decisions. Try to fill out and balance the full spectrum by focusing individually on the low, mid, and high frequency bands, and again comparing with your reference tracks. There's a lot in this video. If there's one takeaway, I would say it is to trust your ears and use reference tracks. Next time we'll talk about mastering and how to get your tracks fully ready to release. Thanks for watching.